Today I will discuss an important policy with regard to overseas lawyers' eligibility to practice as a lawyer in New Zealand. One of my friends from India, Chandigarh, has asked similar question as how an overseas lawyer can gain permanent residency and practice law in New Zealand. New Zealand lawyers are governed by New Zealand Law Society, which is the licensing organization or a body which grants practicing certificates as authority to practice as lawyers in New Zealand. New Zealand Law Society has a process in place for overseas lawyers to practice as lawyers in New Zealand. Unlike India and other countries of the world, New Zealand does not allow overseas lawyers to practice as a lawyer in New Zealand for giving advice and services in respect of New Zealand law. With regard to the eligibility of overseas lawyers, the New Zealand Council of Legal Education, which is the body entitled to check the eligibility of overseas lawyers to practice as a lawyer in New Zealand, the New Zealand Council of Legal Education has published a booklet and an information guide for overseas lawyers to enter into a process for their assessment on the basis of their qualification and experience and skills relating to the legal practice in their home country. As per the information material of New Zealand Council of Legal Education, all overseas law graduates or practicing lawyers anywhere in the world except Australia, they have to apply for an assessment of their skills based on their overseas qualification and experience in practicing law in their home country. There are a number of documents which needs to be supplied for the application of assessment with the New Zealand Council of Legal Education. There is also an assessment fees. The New Zealand Council of Legal Education takes around 1 to 2 months to send the result of that assessment. Generally, overseas lawyers who have experience in practicing law in their home country for 3 to or more years, they are asked to complete 6 subjects in New Zealand law. Particularly, those subjects are legal theory, law of contract, law of torts, criminal law, and property law, and legal ethics. Overseas lawyers who have gained skills in dealing with court work or in appearing in courts in their home country, they can be exempted from passing out one subject. So other subjects they need to complete and they need to qualify before they enter into the next step for their eligibility to practice law in New Zealand. The first step is the assessment part, and when the assessment results come, the applicants or the overseas lawyers, if they want to meet those requirements as per the assessment letter, they have to either study in a university or law school in New Zealand to study that particular subjects, or they can self-prepare their subjects and their knowledge and appear in the exams which are held every year twice, in the month of February and in the month of July. Once these exams are qualified, then the overseas lawyers are asked to get a character certificate from the New Zealand Law Society, and then a completion certificate from the New Zealand Law Society that they have qualified and they have completed all the requirements which were given in the assessment letter. After getting that completion certificate from the New Zealand Council of Legal Education and the character certificate from the New Zealand Law Society, then the applicants apply in the High Court where they live for admission as a barrister and solicitor of the High Court of New Zealand. This is the third step for the overseas lawyers to start practicing as a lawyer in New Zealand. I repeat the three steps. The first is the assessment part from the New Zealand Council of Legal Education. The second is obtaining the completion certificates from the New Zealand Council of Legal Education and character certificate from New Zealand Law Society. The third one is applying to the High Court for an admission as a barrister and solicitor of the High Court of New Zealand. The High Court of New Zealand, in their different areas, they have oath ceremonies for lawyers. It is organized every 3 months, and all the applicants who have applied in the previous 3 months are administered oath by the Honorable Judge of the High Court. Once they have been administered oath, those lawyers are called admitted barristers and solicitors of the High Court of New Zealand, or in other words, they can be called enrolled barristers and solicitors of the High Court of New Zealand. Here it needs to be remembered that the enrolled lawyers or admitted barristers and solicitors of the High Court of New Zealand, they are not allowed to practice as a lawyer in New Zealand courts. For doing practice and appearing in the courts as a barrister or as a barrister and solicitor or as a solicitor of the High Court of New Zealand, the applicants must prove that they have skills required to practice law and that they have been issued practice certificates by the New Zealand Law Society. Every year, New Zealand Law Society grants practicing certificates to all the practicing barristers or barristers and solicitors or solicitors of the High Court of New Zealand. For practicing certificates, there are different requirements for barristers, and there are different requirements for barristers and solicitors, and there are different requirements for solicitors. The underpinning requirements, I would like to tell you that for getting a practice certificate, the barrister sole, if he wants to practice as a barrister sole, he needs to have worked under supervision of a barrister sole in New Zealand for a period of 3 years to prove that he has knowledge and skills required to practice as a lawyer in New Zealand. And if a person has to apply for the practicing certificate as a barrister and solicitor of the High Court of New Zealand, then they must have done a stepping up course, and they have worked under supervision for 3 years, and they have passed the trust accounting exams as required by the New Zealand Law Society, and thereafter they will be thoroughly interviewed by a panel appointed by the New Zealand Law Society to see whether the applicant is competent enough to practice as a barrister and solicitor and do trust accounting work as required by the Lawyers and Conveyancers Act. So there are two requirements, and there are two kinds of practice certificates. First is as a barrister, and second is as a barrister and solicitor of the High Court of New Zealand. So if a person who is overseas lawyer, if he is admitted as a barrister and solicitor of the High Court of New Zealand, after that admission, he needs to work under supervision for a period of 3 years before he can apply for practice certificate as a barrister sole or as a barrister and solicitor of the High Court of New Zealand. So in other sense, or in other words, a overseas lawyer has to pass out few subjects of New Zealand law, then have admission in the High Court of New Zealand, and then practice under supervision for a period of 3 years, and then he or she can apply for practicing certificate as a barrister or a barrister and solicitor on its own account. So these are the requirements for overseas lawyers. Particularly overseas lawyers in New Zealand are regarded as equal with other Kiwi lawyers. It is on the competency and the knowledge and skills of a particular lawyer which makes the person as competent lawyer and appearing in the courts in civil or criminal or other proceedings. These were the requirements for overseas lawyers. One thing I need to explain, that the documentation required for assessment from New Zealand Council of Legal Education of overseas qualification and experience, the English language ability of the applicants is also part of that assessment, and the curriculum vitae of the applicant and the qualification certificates of graduation and LLB degree, along with the syllabus of LLB for that period where the applicant studied in his home country, needs to be submitted to the New Zealand Council of Legal Education. The New Zealand Council of Legal Education undertakes complete investigation into the skills and knowledge of a particular applicant, an overseas lawyer, whether he meets the standards required of New Zealand lawyers to practice law in New Zealand. So these few things would help you as overseas lawyers to think over and make up your mind whether New Zealand is a place where you would like to enroll and start practice as a lawyer. I would say, as a migrant lawyer from India, New Zealand legal system is one of the most strong and high esteem institution throughout the world. We have a very robust system in place to ensure transparency and accountability and welfare of the litigants by the judicial system. If somebody has any question with regard to overseas lawyers' eligibility or conditions working in law firms, they are most welcome to ask me. My email and my address is shown on the screen.